If a married woman engages in an extramarital affair, it doesn't necessarily indicate that she has genuine love for her lover or lacks love for her husband. Similarly, if she maintains a relationship with her husband while being involved with someone else, it doesn't imply that she still loves her husband. In fact, her actions may demonstrate that she prioritizes her own desires above all else, showing self-centeredness rather than love for anyone. When two people are in a committed relationship, they are either together or not. If either party seeks pleasure outside of the relationship, it ceases to be a genuine partnership, let alone love. True love encompasses a deep connection where the need for anyone else diminishes entirely. If someone becomes interested in another person while being in love with someone, it signifies the end of the bond they once shared, as the foundation of being together collapses. This account was shared with me by a close friend after years of our friendship. It lacks any sense of excitement. It's often said that all happy families are similar, while each unhappy family is unhappy in its own unique way. The story I'm about to convey is a rather ordinary tale of betrayal and the loss of affection from a once beloved man. I will attempt to narrate his story as he relayed it to me, employing some literary edits for clarity and coherence. The beginning of my life was far from ideal. My parents tied the knot at a young age, with my mother just 19 and my father 21. They were deeply infatuated with each other, and almost 10 months after their modest wedding, I came into the world. However, it didn't take long for my mother to realize that living in abject poverty wasn't the life she desired, and being married to my father was a grievous mistake. She found herself a wealthy paramour, and, without much concern, left my father behind. My father mourned for a while, but soon found a new companion of his own. Naturally, a 3-year-old child became an inconvenience in their lives. My mother's new partner wasn't particularly keen on raising someone else's child, and without a second thought, my mother took me to an orphanage, renouncing her parental rights along the way. She simply dropped me off, signed the necessary paperwork disowning me, and vanished from my life forever. Thus, I found myself placed in an orphanage, an orphan with living parents. I won't delve into the details of my existence reliant on public assistance. There were both favorable and unfavorable experiences along the way. Nonetheless, I managed to persevere until graduation, but then I faced the question of where to go from there. Contemplating my options, I made the decision to join the Army. I served for 2 years and later gained admission to military school. After 4 years of rigorous training, I successfully graduated and earned the rank of lieutenant. My service officially began, and I dedicated almost 5 years to it. I found myself in various volatile regions, witnessing the realities of conflict. Unfortunately, I sustained a spinal injury that temporarily incapacitated me. Although I managed to recover to some extent, I was deemed unfit for further military duty. The Army had taken its toll on me and eventually discharged me, thrusting me back into civilian life. Nonetheless, I received a pension, earned the title of captain, and was bestowed with the Medal of Honor for my previous service. As a civilian, I pursued a career as a mechanical engineer. Shortly after my demobilization, I secured a job as a turner at a small factory. Within a year, my hard work paid off, and I was promoted to the position of foreman, responsible for overseeing a specific area in the mechanical shop. Eventually, I was honored with the role of head of the entire shop, thanks in part to my higher engineering education. It was a remarkable progression, and within just 2 years, I found myself appointed as the deputy director. What a remarkable journey it had been, but it required relentless dedication, with countless hours spent working day and night. However, amidst my professional achievements, I realized it was time to prioritize starting a family. Thus, the first step was finding a life partner. I met a charming young woman and courted her for 6 months, showering her with candy and flowers. We even embarked on a romantic trip to the sunny shores of the South. It became evident to me that I loved her more than life itself. From the very beginning, I was transparent about my background as an orphan, but unfortunately, this caused some suspicion among others. Society tends to be wary of those without a prominent lineage or tribe. By the time I reached the age of 32, I had secured a respectable position in my career. I had a company car and other luxuries. It was then that I made a marriage proposal to my beloved. Thankfully, she didn't hesitate and agreed wholeheartedly. Thus, I became a proud family man. My wife, Tanya, was 4 years younger than me and worked as a hairdresser in a beauty salon. We lived a comfortable life with no shortage of financial resources. However, there was one aspect that brought us sadness. We struggled to conceive children. We consulted countless doctors, desperately seeking answers. Yet, the response was always the same. There was nothing wrong with us, and we needed to be patient. So we waited, or rather, I waited, filled with hope for the day when our prayers would be answered. Our home was a service 3-room apartment with the potential for future ownership. We furnished it beautifully, ensuring it was no less impressive than others in our community. After approximately a year, I noticed a gradual transformation in my wife Tatiana. She seemed to blossom right before my eyes, becoming more beautiful with each passing day. Her hair underwent a change, her wardrobe received an update, and she adorned herself with a new ring. To my surprise, she started wearing silk underwear and carried herself with an air of leisure even on ordinary workdays. Intrigued, I couldn't help but ask, "Who are you dressing up for?" Her response was laced with a hint of defensiveness as she retorted, "Do I have to look like a freak? Maybe you're just jealous, my friend." Although I wasn't envious yet, as she hadn't given me any reason to be, her metamorphosis raised suspicions within me. Externally, the situation seemed transparent. Rumors circulated that she had found a lover. However, in real life, trust is paramount in a relationship, and I was hesitant to acknowledge the obvious. I pushed away these negative thoughts, unwilling to entertain them. Nevertheless, as time went on, my wife started delaying her return from work. Whether it was a friend's birthday, an urgent order, or a visit to a client's home, she would arrive home late, spending excessive time in the bathroom. Her demeanor towards me became unpredictable, alternating between affectionate and hostile without apparent reason. She did begin earning more money, but my instincts, honed during my time in the Army, told me that something was amiss. I contemplated secretly investigating my beloved wife's late-night activities, but fate had other plans. I was scheduled to go on a business trip for nearly a month. Our partners were responsible for the assembly line, which needed repairs. Therefore, we had to travel there for the task. When the time came to part ways, Tanya shed a few tears, though she refrained from waving her handkerchief as a farewell gesture. Her display of emotion touched me deeply, and I promised to call her regularly and return as soon as possible. After bidding her a tender farewell, I left for the airport. Just as I finished checking in for my flight and sent a text message to my beloved wife, the director called me. He informed me that the conveyor belt had been repaired and launched without our involvement, allowing us to return home immediately. I made numerous attempts to reach Tatiana and bring her joy, but my wife's phone remained switched off. Determined to create a romantic and delightful evening, I hailed a taxi and purchased flowers, champagne, and candy along the way before heading home. The idea was to surprise my beloved wife with a candlelit ambience, symbolizing my return as a devoted husband. Filled with anticipation, I ascended to the 4th floor with a lightness in my step, using my key to quietly unlock the front door. I purposely refrained from ringing the bell, intending to catch her off guard and make the surprise even more special. As I entered the apartment, the only illumination came from the bedroom, casting a soft glow. Perhaps she was engrossed in a book, I speculated. Proceeding with caution, I gently pushed open the door and was taken aback by what I witnessed. There stood my dear Tanya, completely unclothed, on all fours, her hands resting on the headboard. Positioned behind her was a hairy, monkey-like man, also devoid of clothing, wearing a triumphant grin on his face. He held my wife's hair with one hand, while rhythmically striking her, evoking moans of pleasure from her lips. She gasped with passion, uttering words that pierced my heart. Yes, yes, more. Zor, you're my best husband. Both participants were so consumed by their intimate activities that they were oblivious to their surroundings. In a state of shock, I stood motionless, silently observing this spectacle. Eventually, I mustered the courage to cough discreetly, hoping to bring their attention to my presence. The man, momentarily lost in the moment, continued his rhythmic motions until Tatiana startled and covered herself with a sheet. Unlike my wife, her lover did not display fear, but instead lunged at me aggressively, akin to a buffet. "Who are you? Leave this place immediately," he exclaimed with a distinct accent, his unshaven face contorted into a sinister grin. "That's my woman." Before he could react, I swiftly sidestepped, evading his punch aimed at my face. Seizing the opportunity, I swung the champagne bottle, connecting it solidly with his head. The bottle shattered, sending shards and foam flying in all directions. The man groaned and crumpled to the floor, seemingly unconscious. It was only later that I realized the severity of the situation, contemplating the potential consequences of my actions. Tatiana uttered a faint squeak, but her voice fell silent under my piercing gaze. Stepping over the motionless figure on the carpet, I made my way to the kitchen, feeling an unexpected thirst. I poured myself a glass of water and gulped it down, trying to quench the dryness in my throat. From the bedroom, I could hear a commotion, followed by the slam of the front door. It appeared that Tatiana's lover had hastily departed. Quite the lively character he was. 10 minutes later, Tatiana timidly entered the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Yura, my dear Yurashka," she stammered, attempting to explain herself amidst whimpers and pleas for forgiveness. She recited an old lament about feeling neglected, about how I no longer saw her as a woman. She even went as far as to claim that her infidelity was driven by a great love for me. According to her, the more a woman loves a man, the more likely he is to be unfaithful. If I were to forgive her, she promised to bear me children and live together as a happy family. I listened in silence to her nonsensical words, desiring only one thing, for her to swiftly vanish from my life. We obtained a swift divorce, devoid of any property disputes or child custody battles. With a weary aunt, wearing spectacles and burdened by the hardships of life, stamping my passport, I found myself single once more. However, this circumstance failed to bring me any happiness. In the aftermath of our divorce, Tatiana persisted in her attempts to reconcile with me. She went as far as approaching the plant director, wailing dramatically, to depict her love for me and the alleged cruelty of punishing an innocent woman for a harmless prank. To my surprise, the so-called director turned out to be nothing more than the hairy monkey in charge of the local grocery market. Despite his persistent advances, I made a cold-hearted promise to sever his existence, not in the way you might imagine, but rather figuratively decapitating his influence over my life. My performance was so convincing that he believed me and ceased all further attempts at romantic encounters. As for Tatiana's subsequent personal life, I have neither knowledge nor interest. I arrived at the conclusion that a change was necessary in my own life. I resigned from my position at the factory, secured a rented apartment, and embarked on a journey to Siberia. The past was inconsequential. Departing without a specific plan in mind, my sole desire was to distance myself from the place that had inflicted emotional wounds upon me. Boarding a plane, I set course for Krasnoyarsk, and from there, I took a local airline to Semirakinsk. However, After aimlessly wandering its streets, I realized that the town did not resonate with my spirit, prompting me to continue my journey. Fortuitously, I managed to hitch a ride on a passing lumber truck, eventually arriving in Lebieshi. Nestled amidst the wilderness, it was a modest village primarily inhabited by hunters and loggers. The lumberjack introduced me to the most fascinating spot in the village, a cafe with the intriguing name Chainaya, reminiscent of the Soviet era. The hour was quiet, and since there weren't many people around, I decided to grab a quick bite. A charming and lively barmaid swiftly prepared a simple yet satisfying dish, a sausage topped with a fried egg, accompanied by a couple of pickles and a few slices of bread. And of course, 300 milliliters of vodka. How could one resist? After relishing this delightful feast, I inquired about lodging options in the area. Surprisingly, the barmaid herself offered accommodation. How could I refuse the company of such an intelligent person? She resided on the outskirts of the settlement in a relatively spacious house that her late husband had constructed before his unfortunate demise in the taiga a year and a half ago. As Aglaia, my landlady, described the house, she even shed a tear, showcasing her heartfelt connection to it. We reached an agreement on the rent, and it was quite reasonable considering I still had the means. Aglaia, a young woman of 32, possessed a striking allure devoid of affectations and radiated a genuine simplicity. Her slender frame complemented her peroxide-dyed white hair and deep, captivating blue eyes, a true epitome of provincial beauty. As fate would have it, a week later she joined me in my bed, and we began our journey of happiness together. In the neighborhood, I encountered Ivanovich, an elderly hunter who had witnessed countless experiences in the wild. Born and raised in the taiga, he traversed the nearby valleys and ravines on foot and horseback since childhood, acquainting himself with every bush and spring in the vicinity. Thanks to my prior involvement in biathlon, Ivanovich introduced me to hunting. He sold me an old 5-shot hunting carbine, provided hunting equipment, and generously allowed me to utilize a winter hut nestled along a bend of the Yula River. I embarked on my hunting journey, starting off with Ivanovich as my companion and later continuing on my own. The progress was slow but steady. I targeted various animals such as sable, squirrel, and wolf, setting up traps and snares to increase my chances of success. Along the way, Ivanovich kindly gifted me 2 Siberian husky pups, which gradually drew me deeper into the world of hunting. While I didn't fully grasp all the intricacies of taiga hunting, I managed to achieve a certain level of proficiency. The experience felt akin to a honeymoon with Aglaia. In our intimate moments, she ignited like a blazing fire, exuding a passionate energy that consumed me entirely. In her embrace, the troubles of my past life, the demands of work, and the betrayal of my former wife all seemed distant and surreal, fading into insignificance. On a couple of occasions, Aglaia and I ventured to Krasnoyarsk together, primarily for shopping purposes. I lavished most of my money on her, as she held a special place in my heart. Eventually, the topic of having a child arose. At first, I proposed that we formalize our relationship through marriage, and we agreed to make our commitment official at the end of winter. Shortly after the new year, I received a call from the city requesting a couple of wolf pelts. This prompted me to head out to the winter hut to inspect and maintain the traps, fulfill the order, and make the most of my time. In early February, I embarked on the journey, blessed with moderately frosty weather that showed no signs of imminent change. The winter hut awaited me on the Taiga River Yule, approximately 20 kilometers away. While the distance wasn't insurmountable, I anticipated reaching my destination by evening. The most significant request, 2 pelts from a wicked wolf. Obtaining them will require considerable effort. This creature has become a trend among the glamorous elite. Every avid hunter desires to flaunt the skin of this majestic gray predator, accompanied by a heart-wrenching tale. The wolf has always held a distinct place among other predators, renowned for its cunning, remarkable intelligence, endurance, loyalty, and unwavering fearlessness in battle. It has been both despised for its greed and excessive rage, and revered as the embodiment of the devil. Above all, its loyalty to family and lifelong companionship earned great respect. Unlike humans, wolves never betray. They embody unwavering fidelity. Stopping was impossible. I fell into the rhythm of my movements, knowing that any pause would disrupt my breath and ease. Failing to reach my destination before dusk meant enduring a freezing night in the woods. Walking through the taiga at night was no amusement. One wrong step could twist or break a leg, leaving me stranded. Countless lives were lost that way, vanishing into the taiga without a trace. Unraveling their fate remained an enigma. I walked steadily, aided by sticks, through mostly flat terrain, occasionally descending low hills. The dogs, exhausted, no longer trotted beside me, panting heavily while struggling to keep up with my trail. But they had to arrive soon, according to my estimations, not far off. Suddenly, an unsettling gaze bore into me, causing me to flinch involuntarily. I scanned my surroundings without slowing my pace, yet no one was present. Perhaps it was a figment of my imagination. I have grown accustomed to trusting my senses, or more accurately, my instincts. This primal perception of imminent danger has never failed me, be it in war or in everyday life. It signifies the presence of something or someone here. I spun around, finding the dogs unusually quiet and sticking close to me. The silence made me suspicious that a bear might have appeared. I didn't need any more trouble on my hands, so I began jogging lightly, my gaze fixed on the road and its surroundings. I slung my carbine across my chest, ensuring a cartridge was already in the chamber, just in case anything happened. Without warning, Alt abruptly turned his attention towards the woods and let out a mighty roar. His gaze was fixed upon a pile of dead wood, seemingly indicating where danger lurked. I had already noticed the large, black, shaggy carcass slowly advancing through the underbrush towards me. Raising my carbine, time seemed to slow down. Peering through the scope's slit, I could see the bear's menacing face, its enormous fangs protruding and bloodshot eyes. It was a massive creature, a fearsome beast. I gently squeezed the trigger, causing the gun to jerk upward as a steel core bullet shot out from the barrel. Bits of black fur scattered in all directions, creating a red spot precisely in the center of the beast's broad forehead. It felt like I was experiencing everything in a dream. I was both an active participant in the unfolding events and a distant observer of myself. As though encountering an insurmountable obstacle, the bear paused momentarily before collapsing into the snow. Stunned, I regained my senses after the shot and mechanically worked the bolt, loading another cartridge into the chamber. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the discharged cartridge case being expelled. The beast lay motionless, and Alt cautiously approached it. He sniffed the carcass warily and quickly recoiled, his fur standing on end. Just then, Alma barked from behind me. Before I could turn around, they were upon me from the rear. It appeared that a second one had arrived. I certainly hadn't anticipated this twist of events. I felt the repugnant breath of the creature on the nape of my neck, desperately struggling to break free from its grasp. The beast lunged, aiming to sink its teeth into my throat, but the loyal dogs intervened, attacking it from both sides. The situation made it impossible to employ my carbine effectively, so I discarded the useless weapon and frantically reached for my knife. As the predator's teeth ominously closed in on my vulnerable neck, I mustered all my strength and plunged the knife with utmost force. From bottom to top, the blade found its mark between the creature's ribs. We tumbled to the ground, its grip loosening as it gasped for breath. I fought to free myself from the weight of the carcass that had pinned me down. Although the beast twitched and scraped the snow with its claws, its remaining time on this earth was clearly limited. Wary of another attack, I swiftly slit the bear's throat. A dampness soaked through my left sleeve. Somehow, the bear had managed to tear into my arm. I had to return. A wounded man had no place in the unforgiving taiga. Exhausted, I sank down onto the snow. The dogs, too, crouched beside me, their breaths labored as they inhaled the frigid air. Embracing them, I pulled their heads close to mine. They had saved my life today. Alt, sensing something amiss, nuzzled my hand with his moist nose and rested his head on my knee. Alma, in a tender, womanly gesture, licked my cheek. Instead of seeking refuge in the lodge, I did what I could to bandage my hand. Though the wound was not deep, it continued to bleed. I concealed the bear carcasses under branches, gathered my belongings, and with skis on my feet, I made the journey back home before nightfall. I left my backpack in the hallway and entered the house, leaving it unattended. As I walked in, I couldn't hear anyone in the room, but the distant sound of a man's voice and a woman's laughter reached me from the kitchen. In the kitchen, a peculiar man sat at the table, wearing only casual shorts and a worn-out, stretched t-shirt. He held a glass in his hand, while Aglaya, in a short nightgown, sat on his lap, laughing and playfully kissing his hairy chest. The man boldly explored her body, his eyes filled with desire as they fixated on her nearly exposed breasts with their darkened, swollen nipples. They were completely absorbed in each other and didn't even notice my presence, even though I stood just a couple of steps away. Strangely enough, I wasn't shocked by the scene unfolding before me. It was as if I had somehow anticipated such a turn of events. I felt a brief but piercing pain in my heart. Memories of everything Aglaya and I had shared flooded my mind, leaving me bewildered as to why she had treated me this way. For a moment, it felt like it had all happened before, in another life from which I had escaped to this northern place. The hurt and injustice were so overwhelming that tears welled up in my eyes. Finally, they became aware of my presence. Aglaya recoiled in horror, and her companion slowly began to rise, his frightened eyes fixed on the rifle I held in my hands. "Don't, Yura, please don't." Aglaya's voice trembled with fear. She must have thought I intended to harm them both. I smirked, nonchalantly slinging the rifle behind my back. I spat on the ground, turned around, and without uttering a word, I walked away. Aglaya, sobbing, chased after me, desperately trying to explain herself, gripping my jacket to stop me. But I gently pulled her hand away, wordlessly indicating that I had made up my mind, and stepped through the gate. I had experienced enough in life and had learned all too well how easily women could abandon their former loves, swiftly, mercilessly, and without a second thought. I sought shelter for the night at Ivanovich's place. He examined my trophy intently, making a disapproving sound with his teeth while chewing his lips simultaneously. He didn't ask about Aglaya. The situation spoke for itself. We shared a bottle of vodka before retiring to bed. The next morning, I got dressed, slung my backpack over my shoulders, whistled for the dogs, and made my way to the road. I didn't have to wait long until a timber truck pulled up beside me. I opened the door. "Heading to Katanga?" I asked. The driver nodded, and with that, I climbed into the cab, leaving everything behind.